After my father's business failed, my parents sent me to live with my uncle while keeping my younger brother at home. They said it was for my own good, that the city would offer more opportunities, and that I could help my uncle with his expanding company. But deep down, I knew the truth. My parents had always seen more potential in Michael, my brother. He was the gifted one, the golden child. I was just the one they didn't want to worry about. When I first arrived at Uncle Dave's place, it felt strange. It wasn't like the home I grew up in, with its worn-out furniture and the scent of my mom's cooking always lingering in the air. No. Uncle Dave's house was massive, cold, and spotless. Everything looked like it belonged in a magazine, as if no one actually lived there. Uncle Dave himself was friendly enough, but there was always something distant about him. He wasn't like my dad, who would throw an arm around your shoulder and make you feel like everything was okay, even when it wasn't. Uncle Dave was all business, always focused on his next big project, the next expansion, the next way to make more money. "You're lucky to be here," Dad had told me when he dropped me off. "Dave's going to show you the ropes, get you into the business world. It'll be good for you, Matt." But I didn't feel lucky. I felt abandoned. Uncle Dave didn't waste any time putting me to work. His construction business was growing fast, and he needed someone reliable to help manage some of the smaller projects. So, that became my life, working on site during the day and trying to keep up with paperwork at night. I didn't mind the work. It kept my mind off everything else. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been shipped off, that my family had chosen Michael over me. I called home every Sunday, but the conversations with my parents felt forced, especially with Mom. She always seemed distracted, like she had one foot out the door while we were talking. Michael never picked up the phone, though I'd hear about how well he was doing through Mom, how his grades were perfect, how he was already looking at colleges, how proud they were of him. I tried not to let it bother me. I told myself that they were doing what they thought was best. After all, someone had to stay with Michael. And with Dad's business collapsing, they couldn't afford to take care of both of us. Still, it stung. Every time I heard about Michael's successes, it felt like another reminder that I wasn't good enough to stay, that I was expendable. Uncle Dave wasn't one for emotional conversations, so we rarely talked about anything other than work. But one night, after a particularly long day, we were sitting in his living room, and he handed me a beer. "You're doing good work, Matt," he said, taking a sip from his own bottle. "I wasn't sure how you'd handle things, but you're a hard worker. That's more than I can say for a lot of people." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. Compliments weren't something I was used to hearing from family. "I know things aren't easy with your folks right now," he continued. "But sometimes, life throws curveballs. You just have to keep swinging." I wanted to tell him that it wasn't just about the curveballs. It was about feeling unwanted, like I had been cast aside because I wasn't the one with the bright future. But I stayed quiet. "Look," he said, leaning back in his chair. "This business isn't going to run itself forever. I'm getting older, and I don't have any kids. If you keep this up, there could be a future for you here. I'm talking ownership, not just management. The idea of owning a business, of having something that was mine, sounded incredible. It was more than I'd ever imagined for myself. But it also felt like a betrayal. Like if I accepted his offer, I'd be admitting that my parents were right to send me away, that I didn't belong with them anymore. I thanked him, told him I'd think about it, and went to bed. But I didn't sleep much that night. The thought of staying with Uncle Dave, of building a life with him, was tempting. But it also felt wrong. I didn't want to give up on my family, even if they had already given up on me. Months passed. and I kept my head down, focusing on the work. Uncle Dave kept pushing me to take on more responsibility. And I did. But part of me still resisted. I wanted to prove myself. But I also wanted my parents to realize they'd made a mistake. I wanted them to want me back. Then, one day, my mom called me. And I could hear the tension in her voice before she even said a word. "Matt, your dad's sick," she said, her voice cracking. "It's bad. He's in the hospital." I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't seen Dad in over a year. And the last time we talked, it had been a rushed phone call about work. I booked the first flight home. When I arrived at the hospital, I barely recognized him. He looked so much older. So much smaller than the man I remembered. Mom was sitting next to his bed, clutching his hand, while Michael stood by the window, staring out at nothing. "Hey, Dad," I said softly, stepping closer. He turned his head slowly, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if he even recognized me. But then he smiled weakly. "Hey, kiddo," he whispered. "You've been doing good out there with Dave. I'm proud of you." I felt a lump in my throat. "Thanks, Dad. I've been trying." We didn't say much after that. What was there to say? The doctors didn't give us much hope. And within a few days, Dad was gone. The funeral was small and quiet. Just family and a few close friends. Afterward, we all gathered at the house. And it was like stepping into a different world. Michael was the center of attention. As usual. Everyone was talking about his plans for college. How he was going to carry on Dad's legacy. How proud Dad had been of him. No one asked me about my life. No one asked about the work I'd been doing with Uncle Dave. It was like I didn't exist. I left early that night, slipping out the back door while everyone was still inside. I couldn't take it anymore. I drove aimlessly for a while before finally pulling over to the side of the road. My hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. That's when it hit me. I'd spent so much of my life trying to prove myself to people who would never see me the way I wanted them to. My parents had made their choice. And no matter what I did, I was never going to be their golden child. Michael would always be the one they looked to. The one they believed in. But I didn't need their approval anymore. Uncle Dave had seen something in me. Something they never had. He believed in me. And for the first time, I realized that maybe that was enough. When I got back to Uncle Dave's house, he was sitting in the living room, reading through some reports. He looked up when I walked in and nodded. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, taking a deep breath. "I'm good." He didn't press me for details. He never did. But as I sat down across from him, I knew what I had to do. "I've been thinking about your offer," I said. "About the business." He raised an eyebrow. "And? I'm in," I said. "I want to make this work." Uncle Dave smiled. And for the first time, it felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. When Uncle Dave officially retired 2 years later, I became the CEO of the company. It was surreal. Walking into that corner office for the first time, knowing that this business was now mine to lead. The stakes felt higher. But I had spent years preparing for this moment. And I was ready. My first few months as CEO weren't easy. There were hiccups along the way, unforeseen issues on job sites. A tough negotiation that nearly fell through. And a major client threatening to pull their contract. But each time something went wrong, I stayed calm. Problem solved. And pushed forward. The team trusted me. And that trust helped me navigate through the rough patches. Every problem we faced became an opportunity to prove myself again. And with each win, I grew more confident in my abilities. Word started spreading in the industry about our company's success. We became known for our reliability, the quality of our work, and our ability to deliver on time and under budget. We were landing contracts with bigger clients, corporations, high-end residential developers, even government projects. The company was growing faster than ever. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had truly stepped out of the shadow of my past. I bought my own house, a beautiful place just outside the city. It was modern and sleek, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a sprawling backyard. I had a home office, where I spent late nights working on new projects. But I also made time to enjoy the life I'd built. I started traveling, too, visiting cities I'd only ever dreamed of seeing and finally taking a vacation after years of non-stop work. Of course, my success didn't go unnoticed by my family. After my father's death, I'd kept my distance from home, focusing on my career. But as the company grew, I started getting calls from my mom and even Michael. At first, it was casual, checking in, asking how I was doing, but eventually, the conversations turned to money. My mom hinted that things weren't going well financially. Michael had dropped out of college and was struggling to find a stable job. They needed help. And suddenly, the son they had sent away was the one they were turning to. It was a strange feeling, hearing them ask for support after all those years. Part of me wanted to help, it was my family, after all, but another part of me still carried the hurt of being pushed aside. I wasn't the golden child. And now that they needed me, they seemed to forget how easily they had sent me away. I helped them, but on my terms. I paid off some of Michael's debts and made sure Mom was taken care of. But I didn't let them back into my life the way they expected. I wasn't their safety net. And I wasn't going to let them take advantage of the success I had built without them. As the years went on, I expanded the company even further, moving into new markets and diversifying our portfolio. We were no longer just a construction company, we were involved in real estate development, property management, and even sustainable building technologies. Our profits soared, and I found myself being recognized in business magazines, invited to speak at conferences, and approached by investors who wanted to partner with us. The thing that surprised me the most, though, was how much I loved the work. I had always thought I was working to prove something, to my parents, to Michael, to myself, but somewhere along the way, I realized that I wasn't just doing it for validation anymore. I was doing it because I was good at it, and because it brought me a sense of fulfillment I hadn't expected. Uncle Dave retired to a beach house in Florida, where he spent his days fishing and golfing. But we still talked regularly. He'd ask about the company, proud of what I'd accomplished, and I'd update him on the latest projects. Every time we spoke, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the opportunity he had given me. Without him, none of this would have been possible. Looking back, I realized that being sent away was the best thing that could have happened to me. My parents might have chosen Michael, but Uncle Dave had chosen me. And in the end, that was what mattered. I had built something of my own, something that no one could take away from me. I no longer cared about being the golden child. I was the one who had taken the harder road, the one who had made something out of nothing, and the one who had built a life worth living. And for the first time, I was truly proud of who I had become.